So, the plan tonight is I'm going to do about no more than half an hour of a little presentation, which is sort of the vision. So why this, why now, why me standing here? This is really what's this about. So this started with a small group doing some research. The small group was 4 people, a couple who live in the Midlands who wanted to live in the community for a long time, myself and another colleague and friend, both of whom are single people and who also have wanted to live in community for quite a long time. So we have been, for the past, actually it's now 10 months, looking at different models of intergenerational co-living. And when I had a friend, when I tried to explain this to her at a dinner party once, she said, "Oh, I know what you want. You just want to go to McCarthy and Stone, don't you? To one of those lovely retirement homes." I got ice cream and say, "No, that's the absolute I do not want to do." Intergenerational eco-co-living is something that's very different than a retirement village. And we'll look at more what that means. So part of our research was visiting, actually going to places, and we visited Threshold Centre Co-housing, which is a place that's been in existence for about 20 years in Dorset, and going strong, and similar to what I'm going to be proposing sort of in the vision. Interestingly, very little turnover of people there, suggesting that once people get a place there, they actually don't move on. They like living there. A little bit of movement, families, and when children grow up and so on, but a lot of people had been there right from the beginning. Spring Hill in Stroud, some of you may know, is a different model, a sort of urban model on the edge of Stroud, also about 20 years old. Different to what I'm proposing, but similar, has much in common. It isn't what's called an intentional community. It's more like a sort of co-housing group of people that have come together, and when we asked sort of, what do you have an ethos? The answer was, we survive and we're all still here. Which sort of takes off the rose-tinted specs of community living, that it's all sweetness and light, that there are things to work through in all communities, and that certainly when one lives together in communities. But again, very little turnover. There is currently one space going, which is just, I'm on their mailing list now and advertising, and that's the first one that's been available for 3 years. So, and Findhorn, some of you will have visited, may know of Findhorn in Scotland. That's an intentional community, very famous one, an international one that's been in existence, since the 60s. Starting very small and having grown, and it's a place for sort of spiritual and personal development, and where people live the life and live within the community there as well. So it's visited by people all over the world to come and do workshops and all sorts there. And our little group of 4, we workshopped, I don't really like that as a verb, but we worked together, hired some space, spent 2 or 3 days together in a workshop. What was our idea? What was our dream, if you like, our vision? On our own first, then coming together and looking at it. And there was very little difference, sort of minute differences actually between what we all wanted. And it's then that we thought, well, let's look around, let's see if we can actually join a community, and so hence research and looking for places. There are very few places, and certainly not where they could take 4 people. So we said, right, we're going to have to do this ourselves. So that's how it started. So, as I say, that was our little group, which has now become what I'm calling the local group members, of which currently they're very small. There are 2. There is me, Cordelia, for those of you who don't know me, and Dave Inglis, who I'm going to introduce now to Dave to say a little bit about. He's also a local person, to say how he came to this.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Cordelia. Yes, myself and a few friends, we're also a group of 4, actually, when I think about it. It seems to be the magic number. Without ever having met Cordelia or anyone else involved here, we're thinking about a similar kind of problem, which is the what we call the intermediate housing market. So at one extreme, you've got people who can afford a mortgage or who have equity. At the other, you've got people who are on housing benefit and living in social housing of one form or another. And in the middle, an increasingly large proportion of people who are in private rented accommodation that can't afford a mortgage, even though they're their rent payments are covering the commercial mortgage on the property they're living in, which seems unjust, seems strange, paradoxical. So we started exploring possible solutions to that, which led us to various aspects of the cooperative housing movement and the co-housing movement as well. And there's one or two examples of that already up and running in Britain. But it kind of complements this. It might involve a different source of funding for those properties, which are addressed at the intermediate housing market, which are affordable, but it can fit under the same umbrella of co-housing. So there are cooperative solutions to that kind of funding, which we've been exploring. So I think that's probably it from me. We're going to sort of produce more detail on that, and more ideas will come forward. So
thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
So, I said we workshopped our vision. I'm just going to let that stand for a minute. I don't think I need to read it out. Just have a quiet read of that. So, the vision, I would imagine people sitting in this hall now wouldn't have any difficulty with that vision. It's all encompassing, it is inclusive, and so forth. Of course, how that is interpreted and how that is carried out is where the interesting stuff happens in the business plan, which I will be talking about. But from the vision point of view, we, as our group, all felt that it was really important that there is something about living as well as you can, lightly upon the planet, but also somehow serving a greater need than just our own individual needs. Hence that human beings living in groups, which is attractive to a lot of people and is also problematic, or can be. And the economically sustainable bit that is in there, in the vision, is really to make quite clear early on that it's not a replication of the sort of hippie era of communities or communes. The people who are sort of driving this are a similar age to me. We would like a little bit more comfort and beautiful architecture, and so it's not a sort of living on a shoestring. It needs to be economically sustainable, and I'll talk more about that. But it's about choices and how we possibly can bring that together and make that happen. And the deepening our spiritual awareness in everyday life, is that just the sort of messy stuff of living and doing it as well as we can, being kind to each other, and recognising that when conflict happens, and it is a matter of when, not if, that there is a commitment to working through that, as opposed to ducking it, running for the hills, or digging one's heels in, or whatever unhelpful things one might do. So, the vision. Say 20 to 30 passive homes. And passive house design, for those of you who don't know, it started in Germany, hence the spelling of that. Passive house it is as low energy as possible, and built sustainably, so that ideally energy neutral, but as close to as possible. The business model that I'm interested in certainly pursuing, but it may not end up like this, but what I'm interested in is, say, a proportion of approximately 2/3 owned properties of whatever one's needs are and according to what one can afford. Could be detached house, could be 2-bedroom house, could be whatever, at a market value, and 1/3 subsidised. And by that subsidised, I mean they would be lower than the commercial price of properties in this area. And the affordable ones, if you like, the subsidised ones, would be remaining as such, would be retained in perpetuity, so that it's not a case of somebody could come in and buy one at a lower rate, say half, just to pluck a figure out of the air, and then when they move on, sell it for the market rate. It is set at that rate to enable people who couldn't afford to live in this area to be able to have a choice to live there. So it's a different financing model than
any that I've actually come across, I'm not claiming it's innovative and it's new, it may be, but I haven't come across one that is exactly like this, but it has certain benefits, which I'll talk about a bit more in a minute. There are all sorts of other models as well. It may not end up like that, that would be my preference, but there are other models that we can explore afterwards as well. So all residents would sign some form of agreement to uphold the intentional community ethos. And though the value statement that I put up there would be expanded into, actually, it's a type of sort of set rules, terms of engagement, or whatever you want to call it. But that would be absolutely for everybody, regardless of whether one is buying a place outright. For people, for instance, who might want to downsize and they've got the cash and they want to buy the place outright, don't need a mortgage and live there. Exactly the same for them as for somebody who might come in and rent or have a mortgage for one of the other places. Common selection process, same again, exactly the same for everybody. Legal documents and so on to be signed in event of breach of contract. That's the sort of, closing the loop and looking at the worst possible scenario. But you have to have those so that if there is some situation in which somebody or some household or whatever is undermining what the whole community is trying to achieve, there has to be a way to ask them to leave. And that isn't unusual. Those exist in the communities we looked at, and there are different sorts of agreements, but they all have some form. So it's a sort of protection, and also thins out and sort of shapes out right at the beginning. If people have a real difficulty over all of this, maybe this isn't for you. Perhaps, if you don't like it that much at the early stages, it's a little bit of a red flag that perhaps this isn't the place for you. So the idea is to have a shared hub, which would have a hall big enough to certainly accommodate all the people from the community, and ideally a bit bigger, so that people from the community around as well, with kitchen, toilets and so on the ground floor, plus probably, or ideally, guest accommodation upstairs, which would be the sort of thing for community use for when friends and family want to come and stay. So not everybody has to have a spare bedroom in their house or 2 spare bedrooms, which are empty for 90% of the year. Instead, there is this space that can be used through a diary system, renting, and when it's not in use, could actually make some money for the community through Airbnb or something similar of that source. And a few small units for start-up businesses locally, something like a repair shop and small businesses where as yet they haven't got the funds to sort of move out into the community and pay the rates that would be in a high street, for example. So for a given time for start-up, and then to move out when they're ready and robust enough to do so. I said at the beginning that bit about living as well as we can and in a beautiful place, aesthetically pleasing, architecturally designed, low energy, what's not to love, beautiful surroundings of King's Langley, but also giving back and giving more than just appreciating that for ourselves. So the community benefits part of it is really important of this vision. And I've called it exceptional features because it's a term that's used in planning. If you're going to go somewhere where there's difficulty with planning permission, if you can prove that you are an exceptional case, they look more favourably on it, and there are certain sort of boxes to tick, but good reason why one needs to do that. So, here are some of the features. I think that the vision that we have could actually be a flagship for, not just a Corwin, but for Hertfordshire. A real case of, right, come and have a look at this, it can be done, it is sustainable, it is amazing, people love living here, etc. And to really, it's not just playing to their egos and, but what politician doesn't like to have something they can absolutely champion and say, look, we did it here. And I think a community of this sort could be just that. And that would be great if it were. The health hub for community referral and social prescribing was suggested by somebody when I was talking about this vision. And that's that idea that the NHS now enables doctors' surgeries to do the social prescribing. So they might say that somebody with depression, for instance, could do with some reflexology or some training in osteopathy or whatever it is, and that those practitioners, of whom there are many around in this area, could use this hub for their practice. It wouldn't be the community operating that and running it from day to day, it would be the National Health and their own staff and their own system. But to have that as part of the community would be a massive benefit to Kings Langley itself, not just the people who live there, but the wider community. And people who live in the village will know about Kings Langley Neighbourhood Business Plan that goes up until 2030. Identifies a shortage of 1 and 2 bed accommodation. Surprise, surprise. A lot of people in a situation a bit like mine in this village, where they've brought up families and live in a nice big house, biggish house. Children have flown the nest, sometimes partners have gone or died or whatever, and there's one person in a 4-bedroom house. I mean, I know many people like that in Kings Langley, and it was identified in the neighbourhood plan. And of course that makes it even more difficult for anyone starting out, young people and people on lower salaries, being able to buy anything in this area. So the idea of the 1/3, 2/3, just as that example, would actually address that issue in terms of providing some affordable housing for people who are on lower incomes, children from people who've grown up here, who perhaps left the area but could come back. It does require a type of means testing. It has to be able to be eligible to live in a place that is subsidised. And that, again, there are models for how one can do that. And it would be the community, should make that really clear, it would be the community who would determine that and not the council. Just sort of being clear on that when the council, when there's a shortage of housing and people get desperate, they'll try anything and you just got to take it. That is not going to happen. So I'm thinking of a mixture of freehold and leased accommodation. And as it says there, as a low impact community, the idea is to have a holistic design, so it's not a hodgepodge of people doing their self-build and putting up things, though that might be interesting. It's a holistic, aesthetically pleasing passive house design would be used. And passive design, as I said, ultra-low, zero energy for space heating or cooling, so that it's done for the entire community. And it could be an ethical company such as Bioregional, who've already done work in the village with Kings Langley Community Benefit Society, and here at one stage we're interested in something from the school, a bit of land, to take on both the design and the build with their partner or a developer. So that does of course cost. It's going to make the houses more expensive than if it was done in a different way, but it means that nobody needs to release equity or come up with a huge amount of money before the place is actually finished. So it would be finished with the key, I think they kind of call it a key scheme or something. So basically the place is finished and you buy or you rent or whatever. And that means also from the risk point of view, individuals putting in money into this, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute, but for the early stages, which is the getting the land, no small feat, planning permission, feasibility studies for biodiversity, all those sort of things do cost money, but nevertheless, it's a developer who's going to build the whole lot, architect and developer, who are actually taking the risk. Some people were invited from that sort of area of professional expertise tonight but haven't come, but will be interested to know, no doubt, afterwards, just really what interest, if any, there is in this idea. So more community benefits. Ideally, space for communal vegetable gardens, which would presumably and sensibly be where on top of the ground source heating, so where the pipes are laid in a field, say, or in wherever, big space, earth is put back on top and it can grow on top of that. Again, ideally, if it were possible, a nature reserve with a borehole, natural pond. possibly phase 2, but Findhorn has the idea with their natural pond and their streams, it's actually a system of raw sewage going in at one end through a series of ponds, reed beds and so forth that comes out as clear water at the other end. So all sorts of possibilities if one's got the space and the land for that. And access to the open wider community, depending where this is, but very much a sort of welcoming open space. It's the antithesis of what's happening all around me in my streets around here, I live just locally, of gated communities, more and more gates going up with those little intercom things. And you know, the idea of community, you don't just pop round and say, oh hello, you know, oh, come in for a cup of tea. You can't, you've got to ring the buzzer and hope. So this is the exact opposite. This is actually a welcoming place for people to come, walk through, ideally footpaths that would be going through the community. Could be, if somebody wanted to run a business in the hub, could be a coffee shop there, dog walkers, people starting off their walks, whatever, or ending their walks, coming there. So it's an open space, inviting people in, as opposed to that shore up the fence and shut the gates, which is out of fear, actually, but nevertheless it is happening. All of these things that I've just talked about, benefits, are about sort of enhancing health and well-being, and even this government is beginning to recognise that that is really important and that we need to look at different ways of how we can support each other and not rely heavily on a creaking health service. And I think Kings Langley Council and Dacorum Borough Council as well are talking the talk about becoming resilient and future-proofed. Sort of words we might not have used 10 years ago, but very much in parlance now, but there's little evidence yet of how they're doing that or what they think it means. That can educate them and show them what it means on a local scale, and again be part of that flagship. So, land ideally to be owned by the community through a land trust, such as KLCBS, Kings Langley Community Benefit Society, which has been in existence, and many of you know well from the local market, monthly market in Kings Langley on Saturdays. Is one of the things they do. It's tried and tested, it's set up as a legal entity. It's there, people know it, it's got its brand, if you like. So it seemed the most sensible thing to sort of use something that's already there. And it was, after all, KLCBS, through them, that we tried about 8 years ago to buy Balls Pond Farm. It's just over the other side of the A41. And we failed on that one, we were outbid. This is a different model, but it's still the same desire to come together and to live in community. I think it's really important that the land is owned by a land trust or some similar legal entity, but probably a land trust, because there will inevitably, when push comes to shove and the way things are going, and space in the southeast, if the council were able to, it would probably want to put more and more and more houses on a space that's actually been designated to be a community benefit, with lots of open land and wild meadows, lake, pond, whatever. And for that reason, I think it has to be a land trust that owns it, and it is a community asset. There are funds, Lottery Climate Action Fund and others we talked about this morning at KLCBS, that could be considered for that initial development stage of the planning stages. So lots to do there, remember this is a vision, this is a share it now with the community, see what the interest is. It doesn't happen by magic. If this is a popular vision that others would like to share and are moved by or would like to support, even if it's not for you for living there, but you still want to support the idea because you think community living is a way to go and it's a way to model a new way of, not new, but a way of living that actually others could learn from. If that's the case, obviously we do need people and particularly delighted to see the young people who are here tonight, to step up to actually do some of the work which will be necessary to make this happen. It is. By the way, all the pictures stolen from the internet, that's Findhorn, several are from different communities, just to show a variety of what's possible. That was all a different variety. But my vision is sort of very modern, architecturally beautiful, a lot of glass, a lot of light.